welcome to tonight's session, which is part of the Careers Academy. We're very excited to be here in your living room, in your kitchen, I'm not sure, wherever you're watching this. And we just like to make you welcome. And we'll just wait and give it a couple of minutes just for everyone to come in, and then we'll start the session. So my name is Susan Pincus, and I'm the National Careers Professional with the College of Law. And I just would like to very briefly introduce our four guests, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about their interesting backgrounds shortly. So I have Mika, I have Jamie, Nathaniel, and Emma. So what I'm going to do, as you all come in still to the session, I'm just going to acknowledge the country, and then we will get started. So as we gather for tonight's event, we recognise that many of us are on different lands of different traditional custodians. I would like to acknowledge all of the traditional custodians of the lands we're all present on today, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are participating in this session. I pay my respects to each of their elders past, present and emerging. So once again, I just want to welcome everybody to tonight's session, which is on the topic, how to survive your first year as a lawyer. So I like to add in survive and thrive, so it doesn't feel like it's a rat race and it's all just hard work and stress. I like to think that there's also a lot of positive and good things that happen, and our panelists will tell us that, all about their experiences, the highs, the lows, the ups, the downs, etc., because they're the experts after all. So you've all finished your law degree, you breezed through PLT, you signed the role of solicitors. At last, the day you've worked years for has come. You're a lawyer. So what next? So we are so lucky to have tonight four panelists with us, all from very, very different backgrounds, who all work in different areas of law. So I have Mika, I have Jamie, and I have Nathaniel and Emma. So what we'll do is we'll introduce each of them very briefly, and then we're going to get stuck into the nitty-gritty questions. And then at about 6:45, I'll throw the session open to you as the audience, and fire away with those tricky questions, and hopefully we'll get through them all. So if you could leave the questions to the end of the session, so even around 6:20, start writing those in the Q&A box as opposed to chat, because that way I can just coordinate the one box while I'm facilitating the session. So let's start with Emma Berkeley. So Emma completed a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Laws at Deakin University, and officially graduated in 2020 with distinction in both fields. Emma went on to commence a graduate role at Patrick & Associates, a boutique commercial dispute resolution litigation firm, while simultaneously undertaking her PLT. She completed her PLT and received a graduate diploma in legal practice in 2021. Emma is currently working as a lawyer at Patrick & Associates, and she's also a brand ambassador, and a fantastic one at that, for the College of Law, as well as a member of the LIV Young Lawyers Professional Development and Community Issues Committee. Don't know how you fit all that in, Emma. Mika, I'd like to welcome Mika Singh. I know Mika very well through the College of Law, and we go back a couple of years now. So Mika works as a junior legal counsel at Masters Builder Association of Victoria, a member-focused association specialising in construction and building. After briefly working in private practice, Mika soon discovered her passion working as an in-house lawyer. Mika is a real advocate for mentorship for budding lawyers and law students, and encourages them to truly discover the career paths they are excited by. In her spare time, Mika enjoys running, volunteering for non-profits, and playing with her doggo. I like that bit. Moving on to Jamie Impson. So Jamie is a graduate policy officer in the Policy Futures graduate program run by the Department of Premier and Cabinet in Queensland. He is an admitted lawyer in Queensland after completing PLT studies at the College of Law. His area of interest is criminal law. And our final panelist is Nathaniel Honoff. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. And Nathaniel studied a Bachelor of Laws at James Cook University. He was president of the Inter Alia Law Society before commencing PLT with the College of Law. While studying, Nathaniel worked as a paralegal at the native title law firm Cape York Land Council. After graduating, Nathaniel was an associate to Her Honour Judge Fanton, and being advised the best way to get advocacy skills was to go regional. Nathaniel now works as a solicitor for ATSILS, which is the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Legal Service, Queensland, and he is based in Mount Isa. So welcome to all our panelists, and also welcome to our audience. So I'm going to start with you, Emma. I remember you said to me, which was really, really interesting, that everyone has their own individual journey. So perhaps you want to just start off and tell us a little bit about your journey to date, and particularly how you originally wanted to do family law and then you shifted to criminal and then employment and then you moved across to commercial. So kind of what was going on for you with all this?
Absolutely. So hello, everybody. I'd like to extend my welcome. I hope you're doing well with the current lockdown. So this is a great question. I think that most individuals, as they enter into the profession, and ah about the area of law that they wish to practice in, and also query whether they can digress or diverse as they progress. So I think it is, as you've mentioned, Susan, really important to recognise that everyone has their own journey. Personally, my interests changed as my knowledge developed and as I gained more experience and exposure to areas of the law. So as Susan noted, my interests really digressed quite significantly. This change occurred as I progressed throughout my degree and gained more practical experience and was mentored. So to this end, I did the best to complement the theory side, my studies, with as much practical exposure or conversation with professionals as I could. So for instance, I completed family law, and then I completed some shadowing experience with a barrister who practiced in family law. I studied criminal law, and then I completed a legal placement in criminal law. I studied employment law, and then I worked at an employment and personal injuries firm. So for me, as I progressed and as I complemented the theory side with the practical side, I came to experience that I would find it really difficult to separate work and life if I practiced in criminal or family law in that sphere. I would be very invested and find it quite hard to have that separation. And I also found that having worked at a boutique commercial litigation firm, that my interest in that area had really developed, and it was something that I was really attracted to. So my key takeaway would be to keep an open mind, understand that there are various areas of the law, and try and get as much practical experience as you can. I think it's really important to recognise that there are transferable skills, qualities and knowledge across all areas of the law. So definitely keep an open mind.
That's fantastic, Emma. I love that. I love that you kind of, you did the learning by doing. So you got the practical experience and you complemented that with the theoretical. So that's a fantastic insight. Okay, Mika, you mentioned the importance of being realistic in your expectations as a junior. So what does this actually mean?
So I guess when I say that, or rather what I mean by that is people know that you're going to be a junior. So sometimes, and I think, universities can sometimes be guilty of gearing you up to, really fill you in with all this knowledge, and you come out thinking you kind of need to know it all and operate straight off the bat like a senior associate. But I think it is kind of keeping that attitude of reminding yourself, you're a grad, you're just breaking into the profession, and it's okay not to know everything. So I think managing your expectations to accept that, hey, I actually might not know everything, but I want to approach it with the attitude, I want to try and learn. And over time, I just want to develop that knowledge bank to hopefully grow. And I think as you start learning more, your expectations of how you're going to perform will also change. So it's okay to kind of tell yourself, hey, I might not know this, because I think one thing across all law students, and I'm sure all the panelists here can say, is you kind of have this sense once you get into the job, like, oh my God, maybe I should know a little bit more, or maybe I don't know this, and a bit of that. So it's to kind of remind yourself it's okay. It's totally fine to be like, it's totally fine not to know everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to pull yourself into line when you catch yourself out, if there's any kind of negative thoughts going on.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. Just moving on to you, Jamie. So you say that 70% is learning on the job. What practical suggestions do you have around asking for help without feeling that you're imposing on others? So yeah, how much do you put your hand up and say, I'm really struggling with this, without kind of getting a bit of a nuisance?
It's a great question. When you're starting, and something you really have to be mindful of. I would really echo what Micah says. It is really key to keep in mind that you are a grad. One thing we got taught in our training when we started at the Department of the Premier and Cabinet was to always utilize the grad symbol as long as you've got it. People are more likely to want to help you when they know you're starting out. And it is a key ethical value in the legal profession that senior lawyers will help you learn how to be a lawyer and do those skills. I've just tried to keep in mind that people do expect you to make mistakes and not know everything. So if you feel like you are asking a lot of questions, you're probably not. And it's important to keep in mind that you need to expectations set when you're starting in a new role and you don't understand everything you're doing. That's something my supervisor commented on in my performance review recently, is that I'm good at expectation setting. So just making sure you're always going back and asking when you've got a task and you don't know what you're meant to do, instead of wasting an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and then going back and going, oh, it's wrong, I have to do that all again. Just start at the beginning, ask a colleague for help or what they have done in the past on that topic.
Would you save the questions up, Jamie? Would that be an idea? Is just rather than going back and forth too many times, would you just perhaps save a few so that it's less?
I guess it depends on your office environment and what your work culture is. In mine, we're more of a open plan office, and so you just walk around, ask a question. You're not really interrupting anyone.
Okay, all right, that's fabulous. Nathaniel, moving on to you, and this is particularly due to the work environment that you work in. Can you perhaps just tell us a little bit about the clients that you're working with in your role, and how you have to, I suppose, change and adapt your communication style to suit your different audience? So perhaps if you want to just talk us through how that's been a learning for you, I understand.
That's a good question, and it's interesting because you'll be fresh out of university or PLT, and you'll be used to using a very academic or analytical way of talking to people and writing, because that's what's expected to get good marks. But then you enter the real world where that's horrendous language to use if you want to communicate ideas to people. So in the role I'm currently in, we deal primarily with children. So kids obviously have no university education, yet alone a legal background. So you can't impose on them the language that you might use to write a really well thought out essay and expect them to understand it. We talk about access to justice a lot at university, and you'll go through that a bit in PLT when you do ethics, but it's important to know that access to justice also means communicating things in a straightforward manner. So for me, that was something that I had never put any mind to or consider, but you sort of have to change the way you structure the way you talk to people when you're explaining these ideas, and you learn different ways of communicating better, which I think is a really important skill to have, and also something that's imperative to learn when you're starting off.
So how did you kind of get the feedback that maybe you were missing the mark?
Well, the beauty of working with children is that they're just brutally honest. And if they don't understand something, they'll be more than glad to say, no, you're confusing me. But this is a real problem if you're working with adults or people who might be embarrassed to say, I don't understand. But everything can be learned. And the beauty of working in a law firm, as Jamie sort of touched on earlier, is that there's this real sense of wanting to teach new starters. If you're green and keen, people are going to be happy to teach you. And the questions you have, somebody's probably gone through before multiple times and knows a better way and a faster way to do it. So they're happy to show you.
Okay, no, that's great. And also, yeah, what you were saying before, Jamie, you can always just say that you're still a graduate even after you've been there for 5 years. Just moving on to Emma. So in the environment that you work in, being in a commercial litigation firm, tell us a little bit about how you have come to terms with that whole concept of balance, particularly when there's so much talk about looking after your mental health as a solicitor. Yeah, what types of things do you do?
Of course, I think maintaining your own well-being and mental health is something that we are all very much aware of, especially now considering COVID-19. So even if you're working at a commercial litigation firm or something, a completely different field, it's also of importance. So I think that's something to recognise. Personally, I try my best to maintain a good work-life balance and look after my health and well-being. I think we all do our best, especially at the moment with COVID-19. It is often emphasised. For me, it was emphasised throughout my degree, and then as I commenced my profession, my professional development-wise, I think it is important because it recognises your own health, well-being, and how that infiltrates or stems into having a long and prosperous career. They're very much interrelated. You don't want to burn out really early in time. So for me personally, I manage this by connecting with my colleagues. For me, they're a resource and they can become good friends for you as you move on and progress with your career. I try to step away from my desk throughout the day, especially at the moment as we all work from home. So walk my dog, play music. I try and complete virtual meetings in different rooms of my house so that I'm in a different location. I feel like I'm moving around.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I also try and engage with the profession. So I think it can become really easy to complete your job, sit behind your desk, engage in your work, but not in the broader scheme. So the profession is really large. It's in Victoria and it's across Australia. So for me, I love to engage with others, build rapport and so forth. So that's why I have become a brand ambassador and am involved with the LIV. I like to really reach out and enrich myself with the profession that we have because it's very much interrelated and there's opportunities there.
That's great. That's great advice too. And I think it's really important, particularly now, because I think you can kind of hide behind your screen a bit. So it's huge, particularly law being such a relationship-based profession as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mika, just want to ask you a question similar to kind of what we were talking about with Nathaniel about how you tailor your communication to your audience and also where you work. So perhaps if you want to just tell us a little bit about like speaking like a lawyer, drafting emails, things like that. So what have your learnings been?
Yeah, it's I think that's a really, really important point. And to be honest, that was one of the most noticeable things I think I learned going into the profession. Along with some of my friends, we would call it like the lawyer talk. So your emails will be drafted in such a strange way, or you'd be speaking to clients in a way you've never articulated conversations before. And I think that can be quite uncharted territory and quite unfamiliar when you're just breaking into the law. So I think a few points there. One, I'd definitely say, if for students listening and grads kind of coming into the profession, don't disregard the importance of soft skills like communication and people skills. It's especially like Emma touched on earlier in terms of COVID and the environment we're living in, it might not be as unfamiliar to be inducted into a role working from home. So it is really important to kind of keep some of those skills alive, whether it is through, hanging out with your friends and knowing how to socialize and kind of, keep that banter and people skills kind of alive. But also more so in a professional setting, it is really important to understand the tone of your firm. So some firms are a little bit more formal, other firms are a little bit more informal. Like Susan briefly mentioned, in relation to where I currently work, I work in an in-house environment. So we have a bit of a unique approach because of the way the organisation is kind of structured, but it allows us the flexibility to be a little bit more informal. So I think what it is making sure your emails are geared to reflect that. So if you're working under a mentor that likes things a little bit structured, have a go at maybe taking that approach. And then if you're working at an informal place, you can kind of tailor it to that sense. But I also say, what I used to do is keep a note of lessons and a little notebook of going, oh, I picked that up today. And how do I make sure the next time I'm going to speak to a client or speak to a solicitor, is that a little bit different, or anything you can, take away. And I'm a really big believer in all these little things will end up, when you step out of the profession, or if you don't, or, you kind of one day look back on, whoa, I've come such a huge way. And then you start looking back at some of the notes you started taking earlier going, oh my God, I used to check my subject line and make sure I write regards and all these things. But yeah, it is something I feel like people don't, or I wasn't actively spoken to about going, it's going to be a bit of a transition going from the normal, like, banter conversations you potentially have to drafting structured emails to having a bit more professional conversations, and ensuring conversations with clients, you keep the principles of confidentiality and privilege and all these things in mind. So yeah, things like that are definitely ones that I think might be good to keep a note of, as well as refine as you kind of go through.
So have you still got your black book?
I do. It's not black. I think it's pink, but it's fine. The book is still there.
Okay. And you do a bit of that. Do you do that most days or at the end of the week, or?
Yeah, I think it's most months. Usually when I kind of get to the point, we have it lines up with some of my like monthly check-ins. And weirdly, I've been doing this since I graduated. And I found it so helpful because you also kind of start noticing your skills develop, not just in how do I write emails, but also some of the different types of work that you're doing. So whether you advised on an NDA and now you're advising on massive construction contracts or whatever, you start collecting all these things and then you go, whoa, I've actually learned a lot. And I think, to be honest, that was also a reason where I'm like, it'd be great to pass some of these like tangible, practical tools down to, I guess, the next cohort of people coming and going, hey, there's some things like tips and tricks that might actually help going, to help develop some of these skills. So
that's great. Yes. So it's kind of something like this session, but maybe just drilling down into some more detailed suggestions. That's great. Jamie, I just wanted to ask you, you talk about the importance of being genuine and being yourself. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about how that pans out for you?
Yeah. So I guess in the profession and in areas relevant to it, such as in government, your relationships are very important, and you will call on your relationships from time to time, including at times when you don't expect to. So for example, when I was clerking, I made some good relationships with the barristers that we briefed on our matters. And then I've called on those barristers to help me understand the legal issues that I couldn't get my head around when I needed to brief upwards on those matters. So that was helpful not long ago when I was briefing on a policy issue I wasn't too familiar with. But also when you're trying to make these connections, especially at networking events, which are important, you need to consider, is this you, or are you putting like a persona on that you think is what a lawyer should be? Because it can be quite easy to see through that veneer and tell that you are not acting like yourself, that it's not genuinely who you are. And sometimes, especially if it looks like someone is trying to get something out of someone that they are meeting for the first time and they've come in with a intended end goal, it can be quite obvious. And I guess it's sort of embarrassing when other people around you are noticing that, and you might not be noticing that yourself. So I guess just don't go into things with a perceived idea of what you want to do out of them. So in that, I mean, like going to a networking event and being like, I'm going to get a job from this person tonight, because odds are that's not going to happen. But you could make a meaningful relationship that you draw on later that could run into a job offer. You never know. But I guess it's always just actually be you, take yourself into these situations and don't pretend to be someone you're not.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. Yeah, absolutely. Be quite exhausting putting on an act like that. Nathaniel, you mentioned how important it was for you to do research and carefully choose the organisation that you work for. So, perhaps just talk us through what that meant for you in terms of doing the research. For example, I think, doing conveyancing versus advocacy. How did you make that decision?
Some good advice I got when I was at university was to really research your firm's ethics and the area of law your firm's involved with, because chances are you're going to be there a fair while. So when you're at university and you're looking for clerkships, or when you're graduating and you're looking for gainful employment, there's a real tendency for people, and you'll hear this a bit, to sort of rush to whatever opportunities are open, because experience trumps anything else. However, the issue is with that, you might end up winding up in an area of your law you're not quite passionate about, or doing something you're not particularly keen on. So part of any job application process will involve you having to go through looking at the firm's values or their visions. And people have a tendency, and I've been guilty of this in the past, to sort of overlook that. But you really should go over that, because there might be something in there that really interests you, or something you really want experience in, or something that you're passionate about. So if you're passionate about pro bono work, you should be looking for that, does my firm offer this, or things like that. And you might think, well, being picky or being pedantic about this might affect my employability, but it actually won't. I think it makes you a much more competitive candidate to say, well, I've done the research, and the reason I'm applying for this job is because I know you're involved in this, this, and this. And it's not just when you're looking for jobs. If you're doing work at a law firm, you should go seeking out the work that other lawyers are doing that you might be interested in, because people tend to be incredibly helpful. And if you want to learn, people are usually more than happy to help. So if you notice somebody's got an interesting file that you've never seen before, I think it's very worthwhile, especially in your early stages, to say, well, do you mind talking me through this? I've never seen this area of law. And you'll gain so much experience from doing that. I think going back to your example, it's sort of, what do you want to do long term? If you're interested in being the best conveyancer, in the big city, then you should follow that path. And really, you've spent 5 years studying, or 4 years doing law and PLT. So you do owe it to yourself to actually choose an area of law that's going to interest you. The last thing you're going to do is be in a 9-to-5, bored out of your brains, There's lots of exciting areas in law and lots of things to get excited about. So it's well worth spending those early stages really drilling into it.
It's a really kind of a hard one there, because a lot of people that I speak to, they say, well, we are in a pandemic and it's really hard to pick and choose. So I do need to get work experience, and maybe this is not quite where I want to be, but it's a means to an end. So how do you kind of balance that?
Well, everything's a stepping stone. And I think, like I said, I think any form of legal experience, with a few exceptions, is going to be really beneficial for you in the long run. Just working in a law firm, doing any form of work, will really help you out. And if it's not something you're entirely keen on, you don't have to do it forever. But don't be afraid. Don't be, nervous that, I might not get this job, I might not do it. You really should apply for it anyway. And you shouldn't be afraid to, go for something a little bigger. Yeah. Obviously, there's limited job opportunities, but with that, COVID's made a number of areas of law really bloom. So seeing a huge increase in the importance of employment law, and that really concerns things like legislation reform. So there's lots of different bits of legroom to work around, and you can really find areas you're interested in. You just have to look and dig quite difficultly.
Yeah, and areas outside of the traditional paths as
Precisely.
well.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Emma, I just wanted you to perhaps just share this platinum rule. You mentioned it, and I was particularly taken with it. So do you want to just step us through the platinum rule and what that actually means?
Of course. I think we've actually all of us panelists have touched on this in some way or form so far. But the platinum rule is a rule essentially whereby you recognise how others want to be treated and you treat them in that way. So you've probably heard of the term treat others as you wish to be treated. So that's termed the golden rule. In comparison to that, you have the platinum rule. So for me, I enter into most situations abiding by that golden rule, treat others as you wish to be treated. But I think as you enter the profession, as you build connections, you start to communicate with third parties, court registry staff, colleagues, clients. You begin to really understand the importance of recognising how others wish to be treated and treating them in that way. So to take Nathaniel's example, if you're dealing with children, you're going to treat them in a really specific way, really engage with them on their level so that they can understand what you're saying. So you're not going to enter into that situation and communicate with them like you're communicating to the senior associate or your supervisor. So for me, and I think for all of us in any situation, it's really important to understand how others wish to be treated and treat them in that way. So drawing upon what Mick has discussed, communication skills, do they like calls, emails, Teams messages, text messages? You can adapt how you communicate based on what they prefer. And that's really important as you enter the profession and you're supervised. So strongly recommend research the Platinum Rule.
Yes, I love it. I love it. Mika, just a question, and Emma has touched on this as well, and so has Jamie in terms of what not to do when you're networking. But tell us a little bit about how important has it been for you to build and then maintain those networks?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of networking, like you've mentioned, all the panelists have kind of touched on it. Hopefully that enforces to the audience, you know, it is quite an important thing in the law. So joining things like they have now in terms of, you know, the appropriate webinars or reading articles or, you know, coffee catch-ups. And one that I actually used to always do is just do a little stalk on LinkedIn or whatever socials they had and see if they had an available email or however, and just gently say, hey, look, I'm just a law student or wherever you are. It'd be great if I could just learn a little bit more about you and get some guidance. You would be surprised the amount of people that would be happy to actually sit down and just have a chat or a call. And, you know, I'm sure all the panelists are kind of here because they are willing and happy to kind of answer those questions. So one of my colleagues actually reminded me of this yesterday because someone had, you know, pinged her on LinkedIn and she was sharing some of that discussion and goes, wow, I was surprised someone actually took the initiative to do that. I would have never thought of doing that when I was a law student. And it was interesting coming full circle, talking to her about, you know, the fact that that's how I networked. And I go, you know, like Emma said, she got a bit more of a full conversation or image of the law by doing the experience, which I think has incredible value. But so do I think leveraging of other people's experience, you know, and having those conversations with seniors in the profession or even juniors that go, hey, this is my experience. You kind of get a bit of a snippet into someone else's life without actually having done it. So yeah, I think, you know, reach out, more than welcome for you guys to reach out and ping me on LinkedIn or whoever, but really don't undervalue how important it is to even if you're not doing anything, you know, attend some of these webinars. You might pick up a thing or two or recognize a face somewhere and be like, oh, I remember seeing you somewhere. And just to what Jamie said earlier, just approach it with a sense of genuineness and be like, I just want to know your story and learn a little bit more about you. And yeah, I think you'll be surprised how friendly and welcoming the law profession actually can be.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's something that everyone needs to do throughout their career as well. So, you know, when you work hard and you build these connections should stay as part of your journey as well. So it's always lovely to catch up with people and just to find out what's kind of happening in their area as well. So yeah, absolutely. That's one of the most critical things. Jamie, just probably going a bit further into what Emma was saying about learning about the types of people that you don't want to be. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about what your learnings have been there and how you want to be perceived?
Yeah. Just stepping back as well to Nathaniel's question quickly before I answer this one, about trying to not pigeonhole yourself, but trying to very specifically choose where you want to go. I think it's also important to note that a lot of lawyers do speak about serendipitously coming across the area of law that they're very interested in. So don't worry if you can't get into what you think you're excited in now, especially if you're still at university, because you haven't actually experienced the practice of that area. And it could be completely different to the very interesting cases you read in law school. You might end up in very banal matters day to day in that area of law that aren't that exciting. So don't worry too much, I guess, is my takeaway on that one. In terms of the new question, the types of people you meet and how you want to be perceived, I think it's important to realize that the legal profession is quite small still. So there are only so many people that you'll see, and you'll see them again and again at events after events. So you don't want to come across on the wrong foot, and you don't want to be perceived in a way that isn't, I guess, what you're trying to brand yourself as. So I guess none of us would want to come across as mean, as brash or nasty or dumb. And that could also be the case if you aren't working on your other soft skills, such as being prepared, time management skills. So that goes as well with clients and other people you meet with. If you don't put enough time into preparing for something, you might come across as dumb in the meeting, and then people will remember that the next time they meet you. You're the person who was babbling over answers in the meeting because you hadn't researched the topic that you knew was going to be discussed anyway. So I guess just always keeping in mind at the fore of your mind, people are going to be making decisions about me and what they think I am, even if they're not correct decisions, and just making sure that you're always coming across as how you want to be perceived.
Okay, fantastic. Nathaniel, I'm going to ask you a question. So if everyone can start putting their questions into the Q&A, that would be fantastic, because we're just going so well. This panel is so super organized. So we are going great guns. I mean, one of the things that you said, which I thought was really, really interesting, was that you know a lot, but you really know nothing. So that was more around coming to terms like with office etiquette and just kind of like little things like using the right templates, anything, you know, around office administration. So perhaps you want to just tell us a little bit about what to expect there.
Yeah, so this is some sort of light-hearted advice to finish off, and it's been touched on really well earlier, but you'll realize you might come out of law and you'll think, oh, I've drafted this and it's really well done, and you'll feel like a real gun. And then, you know, the printer might not work and you just realize, you know, absolutely nothing, you know, so it's incredibly humbling. And when you start off, there'll just be lots of small things or big things that you're completely unaware of. So that might be worrying at first, because you may feel this burden or pressure to think, oh, I should understand this or I should know this, but it all comes with experience. And, you know, taking joy in the process of actually learning things and knowing how to do things properly is much more rewarding than spending ages stressing. And to piggyback, I think Jamie said it earlier, when asking for advice with people, they're always happy to help. And what might be 2 hours of you worrying about something and saying, oh, I don't know this, you might do 2 hours of work, which is completely wasted, which could be answered by somebody in 5 minutes. And that's going to be a lot more worthwhile for not only yourself, but also for where you're working at. Obviously, it's in their best interest for you to work efficiently and for you to get things done quickly. So people shouldn't feel any pressure to ask questions and ask for help. And if you don't know anything, don't worry about it, because chances are there's been 1,000 people in your exact position before, and that's just starting at the ropes.
Okay, fabulous. I think we're going to just launch into some questions now. So someone's asked a question about work-life balance, and we probably already covered that one, but we can come back to it a little bit later. There's a question around how do you go about finding volunteer roles and opportunities as a student? So who wants to handle that one? Or maybe a couple of you might want to give your view on that.
If you're still at university, I'd suggest getting in contact with your careers officers there. They'll be in tune with what's around in your local area. And you can always look at the community legal centres around in your area. They are a very important place for the community to be able to receive access to justice through legal advice. And you'll be able to get valuable experience with them, with working with admitted solicitors who practice in those areas.
Does anyone else have any other suggestions?
Yeah, I guess maybe to add to what Jamie said, when I was trying to get a bit of experience through, you know, my law degree as well as outside, I took a bit of an alternative route. I definitely looked at those, but I was like, oh, they've already got like a massive wait list. So I would actually just reach out to law firms. wherever you're living, just see, walk past the law firm, down to Coles or whatever, and just give them a call or even send an email, and just be like, hey, look, I'm getting a bit of experience, or reach out to some barristers, or, definitely have a chat to the College of Law, guru Susan about it. But I do think, taking a bit of a nimble approach to this, where you go, well, everyone's going to do that. What can kind of set me apart, and go, maybe I might just reach out. And something I wish someone would have told me is reach out to your uni professors. Like, they're teaching you the contents. They really get the struggle of law school. So yeah, just think about different resources you can use to get there.
Yeah, great advice, Mika. Music to my ears. What experiences do law firms value and seek from fresh graduates, do you think? Who wants to take that one?
I might start this one off, and then someone else can help me finish this, maybe.
Okay.
But what I've found is, if you're going to enter the legal profession, more so skills-wise, you do definitely need to work on the attention to detail part. And again, I guess the framework you should go into this with is, I might not know the entire area of law I'm going into, but I can get these like 2%ers right. If someone asks me to draft an email, I can double check and make sure it doesn't have any spelling mistakes. Or, if I'm going to write an X amount of number figure, I can make sure the commas are done correctly and the full stops. As almost administrative as that sounds, that gets really, really important. And also something like time management, especially, and I'm sure Emma can maybe touch on this a little bit more, if you're going to want to gear yourself towards going into litigation. I started in insurance litigation, so I did a bit of that and then moved in-house. And something I picked up there was time management. Dates become really critical. You have certain prescribed times that you need to get those things in by. So yeah, two things I would want to pass on is attention to detail and time management, for sure.
Does anyone else want to add any? Because I know that there's a whole stack of them, but any ones from your perspective that you think have been really important and perhaps even got you across the line?
I would reiterate what Mika has said, definitely attention to detail. I think a lot of us in the profession become perfectionists if you're not already. A key theme that I think you can take away from this is being your genuine self. So yes, you have your knowledge of the law, you have your degree, you've got your marks, experience, but in addition to that, you have who you are as a person. You have your personal skills, how you can relate to others, how you relate to your colleagues, and all of that is really important. And it is often what can make you stand out. I just add that in.
Yes, that's really important, that whole thing about being yourself and bringing yourself to work as well, the whole person. So this question here is about, the impact of COVID, other alternatives that you can seek out. Because the volunteer roles, particularly some of the community centres, of course, aren't taking people on now. So probably, like Mika, you touched on that around suburban firms and perhaps just even following up emails and then following up with a phone call and just trying to extend it as much as you can beyond just the community legal centres.
Yeah, but I think to that as well, reach out to, your university kind of centre, help centre kind of thing if you have it, even if it is something as simple as putting out articles or publishing like web content. You'd be surprised, how all those little things, they're still teaching you something. So I would say, although, to be honest, if I'm going to be honest, it's really difficult to answer that because I've never been in an environment where getting voluntary experience isn't like going into a centre and getting it. But I would still say, think about alternatives of how you can develop those skills. It could be going, let's do some content development, or maybe is there someone, in my professional network, or is there someone who's not directly in the law but close to it that could still help me develop some of the skills that I would need to be a better lawyer, that will then help me get kind of that next role. So yeah, maybe don't just hone into the law side, maybe make it a little bit broader to potentially see if that helps.
So thinking kind of laterally and broader. This is a question around, do you think employers treat you different as a graduate lawyer than a student. I've had bad experience in part-time positions at law firms by treatment of supervisors, and just wondering if they take advantage of you as a graduate or if you feel more respected and valued. Does anyone want to answer that question?
I think if you're getting mistreated for being a graduate, then it's probably says more about the person who's, you know, potentially looking down on you for that than yourself. But I think that you may feel a bit more pressure because as a student, if you're doing work experience, the real reason you're there is because you're there to learn and you're there to gain experience. Well, as a graduate, you may feel like, oh, well, I should already have that. I've signed the, you know, role of solicitors. I should already know all this stuff. But, and it's going to be different from place to place and who you work with. But I think for the most people, fortunately, the experience is fairly much the opposite of that. Everybody started off, it's not so much the old ages of law where it was run by these, you know, really strict down the drum sort of bosses, but people who tend to be more understanding. And there's a larger emphasis on work-life balance and healthy work habits now than there was in the past that I think are going to work in your benefit. And, you know, it's probably going to be more mindful of the expectations you place on yourself rather than the expectations you think might be being placed on you.
Okay. Another question, it is a quite a long one, so I'm going to just try and get to the center of it. A question around, is it easier getting a job as a graduate rather than a junior lawyer that has gotten their practicing certificate? So is it easier getting a job as a graduate rather than a junior lawyer that has got their practicing certificate? So the practice certificate is 2 years. It takes 2 years. So does anyone want to attempt that question?
The other panelists might have a more better answer to this, but for the most part, you just, when you're applying for jobs, most junior lawyer roles may be looking for certain years experience, and you'll see that in the application. Graduate positions are a fantastic way to start off. So if they are available, and you may have different opinions about this, but I'd encourage people to apply for that because that's really what's going to give you the most balanced and well-rounded area and exposure to law. If you're applying for junior lawyer positions, just be mindful. They may be prerequisites.
Okay. And the practicing certificates, does anyone want to talk about the practicing certificates and how they're approaching that, especially, yeah, any of you, Mika maybe, or Emma?
Yeah, so I guess a few things about that question. If that's maybe more geared towards, hey, I've graduated uni, I have then gotten admitted as a lawyer, and then you get your practicing certificate as if you're going to get your driver's license, going, here, you're on your L's for 2 years, and then you get, you know, unrestricted, and that kind of bar comes off. If the question's more geared towards, do I graduate, get admitted, and then still apply for grad roles, or do I wait to get admitted, get my practicing certificate? Like how all those, they all have slightly different requirements. So as a starting point, I would recommend getting a little bit more information about what it is that, you know, this audience member is kind of particularly asking. But know that if you're wanting to apply for graduate roles, just because you've graduated and you get your, you know, practicing like admitted, doesn't preclude you from applying for graduate roles. I was admitted, and I was admitted as a lawyer, but didn't have a certificate, so didn't get my license. So for example, I sat my test, but I didn't actually get the certificate saying you can go and, you know, do your thing. And I was still applying for grad roles. I would just reach out to them and be like, hey, are you still, you know, I've graduated, I'm 6 months out of uni. Would you still consider my application? And I think what I found was, I think there's like a year or something where you're still considered a grad. But what I'd say is, in my experience, I haven't really, I know there is a preference for if you have a practicing certificate, because that means someone had been supervising you and you've actually been working as a lawyer. So maybe that may be that preference. But if you're considering applying for a grad role and haven't got to that practicing certificate, I would still, you know, throw the hat in the ring.
Absolutely.
I don't see any issues with that.
Okay. Does competition, like mooting, negotiations, etc., experience during law school matter when you apply for jobs at a law firm? Emma, do you want to answer that one?
Of course. So in terms of whether it matters, that classification, I think it can and it can't. I think potential employers look at your entire resume, your entire CV, so they won't hone in on whether you have mooting experience or not. I think it is definitely favourable because it demonstrates an element of initiative. You've gone out of your way to participate in that form of activity, and it also in turn advances your advocacy skills. So you have had some exposure about what it is like to advocate on behalf of, it might be an issue or cause or client, make belief. But when you then enter the profession and you're dealing with clients, you're required to make an appearance or you're instructing counsel or barrister to appear, you understand what it feels like in that situation, in that circumstance, and therefore you can prepare at your utmost and make sure that counsel is prepared as they need to be. So it definitely has an element of benefit, but I wouldn't say it's the be all and all end all if you haven't completed an activity of that kind.
Good advice. A question here about with firms being hierarchical, how as a first year lawyer enforcing the platinum lawyering approach, do you have to give up on advocacy skills in order to blend in the culture that you would not fit?
Very interesting question. So of course, in most firms, there is that hierarchy. It's expected. As you enter the profession, you are at the bottom of the hierarchy. If we use that term, I don't particularly like the term, but it is where you are. As you gain more experience, you'll progress further. In terms of the platinum rule, obviously, hopefully you've applied for a role and you've been accepted into an organisation or structure that you like. So as Nathaniel touched on, it has values, themes that you embellish and you wish to promote. So therefore, when you enter that workplace and you're engaging with colleagues, third parties, you're able to easily first use the golden rule, but then second, apply the platinum rule. So there should be hopefully no issue in terms of adapting how others like to be treated and treating them in that way. In saying that, though, if others like to be approached or treated in a certain way and that conflicts with how you like to approach others or treat others, there's nothing saying that you can maybe have a conversation with them and say, look, I understand that you like to work in this way, but it doesn't sit quite right with me, or this is how I would approach it. Is that okay? So I think the importance of having a conversation, if there's anything that doesn't sit quite right with you, if that's how I'm interpreting the question, I hope that's what you're seeking. I'm just having a line of communication and trying to apply the platinum rule when you can.
And at the end of the day, the ethical principles rest upon you. You're the one making the decisions. Every organization is hierarchical because there will be someone above you who can tell you you are making the wrong or right decision for most decisions, but ethical decisions at the end of the day come back to you and you need to be accountable for what decisions you have made ethically. And I don't think it's an answer to just say, I was told to do the wrong thing. So it's also an issue of culture. Is the culture of the place you're in correct more so than hierarchy?
And that's up to you to research that as much as you can when you're going through interviews and doing some of those networking meetings too. A question about the basic tasks of a young lawyer in a law firm in brief. How would you describe those? Emma?
Sure, I'll jump
I know
on.
you're in the hot spot.
So tasks can really vary. Obviously, it depends on the area of law and the position that you've taken. But graduate roles, you're there to learn and support, has been my experience. So you might be drafting legal documents, might be a summons, it might be some proposed orders, it might be a letter of engagement, that retainer. It might be that you're completing some legal research, which is highly likely, which then feeds into other work. So I think the spectrum of work is really broad. And for me, it was something that I really liked and really relished. Often at university, you weren't told this is the process of getting your matter listed for directions. So when you enter the profession and you're learning practically on the spot, you're able to do the research, understand how you actually complete the steps to get it listed for directions, and in turn support your supervisor who will settle the documents and get it all sent. So a range of work and something to be excited about, in my view.
All right, some skills that are developed in practice which may not be covered in university. What skills do you think that might incorporate?
I think one of the most important skills that isn't really developed at university is talking with other people and communicating with other people who do not have a strong basis in the law and might not necessarily understand what you're talking about. This really goes back to Nathaniel's point of always targeting what you're saying to your audience. And you need to be very mindful of that when you're starting out. You might want to sound like what you think a lawyer sounds like, someone using all these big words or these very long, confusing sentences that make no sense to anyone except someone who has a law degree. But it's just not helpful to many people to have that kind of material given to them in any form. So I guess the main skill is just taking the audience, trying to identify who the audience is, taking it in the front of your mind and really making sure what you're doing is actually relevant to them, helpful to them, gives them the answer they want, and helps them make the decisions they need to make.
Great. A question about the imposter syndrome, moments where you've seriously doubted yourself. If so, how did you deal with this? Who wants to tackle that one?
I think I could probably answer this really well. I think this was actually one of the reasons Susan and I were introduced. But yeah, I think, that's definitely quite a real theme in the legal profession. And I think, I guess the way, so many of these kind of conversations tie back to so many of the things I've already spoken about, but it is really going, trying to be your genuine self and going, where does that all really start from? And doing a law degree and doing what you do for a job and how you're earning money and what you do. And I think I saw briefly a Q&A that asked about those two splits in personality. Someone had briefly asked that as well, they are different things. So I feel like if you are, there's what you do, and that's going to be a reflection of your skills and experience and where you are, and then there's who you are. And if those two things aren't aligning, then, you just need to have a conversation with either yourself or one of your mentors or an advisor like Susan. That's who I reached out to. And I was like, look, I don't really feel like I'm suited for this. It feels like I'm kind of faking my way through this. What do I do? And sometimes it's going, okay, well, is it a question of, are the skills lacking? Or is it a question of, it's not really a good cultural fit, or it's not? So I think it's really honing down on what it is that's kind of dragging that conversation down, and then coming up with some practical steps to kind of help bridge that. But I'm such a strong advocate of always reaching out to other people. I think even to the conversation of, when there is that hierarchy, yes, you've got that ethical thing, those ethical decisions and things to make, like Jamie had touched on, but that's where you have mentors. That's where you have people in the profession that have done it. So feel free to reach out, even if it is just to get a bit of a direction going, I'm really confused. I don't know how to do this. What do I do? So yeah, that would be my advice.
Okay, that's great. We're coming to an end. So it is almost 7 o'clock. So I'm just going to quickly whip around and ask you one final question each. And hopefully I don't get this back to front. But if there was one thing that you wished you knew back then when you were a student that you know now, what would that be? So maybe starting with you, Mika, and we'll just go around.
Yeah, I think the one thing I wish I'd known was, I wish I'd gotten a better understanding about what being a lawyer meant and what that career path looked for me. And so I think the advice that I would provide to juniors is do your due diligence, whether that means researching the firm, whether that means speaking to people to work in a practice area, whether that means shadowing, do whatever you feel like you need to do, or reach out to people to go, how do I even do this? I don't even know. To just get a better understanding of going, it's a real journey. So just because you do a law degree doesn't mean you're a lawyer. Once you get your, admitted doesn't mean you're a lawyer. Once you get your practicing certificate, great. Now you're admitted with 2 years. It's a very long kind of career path. So, if it is, and that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But just have a bit more of a think about, is this am I really into this? Because it can be testing sometimes. And, you do need to have that kind of engagement with the profession to want to stay in it for that long, through the long haul.
Jamie.
I guess something I thought now that I wish I knew is that you need to make sure that you are nurturing things outside of the law as well, and don't let the law become this big thing that you're always worried about and always concerned about, you still need to be an interesting person. So you need to have other pursuits outside of the law, not only to help you in the law, but also it really goes to your work-life balance. If you don't have anything else that you're going to occupy your time with, it really could start that your work does start to take over your life. So for all facets of your life, it's important to make sure that you do have other things going on that you're interested in and that you can go to that are completely unrelated to the law, have nothing to do with it, and that you can talk about with other people.
Absolutely. Nathaniel.
Those are all really good. One of the ones that I've learned a lot this year is how much more valuable having good routines in place may be to having what you perceive as talent or skill. So if you don't know something or you think you could be doing something better, instead of mulling down and thinking, oh, well, I need to learn this, this, and this, just focus on the way you're doing it. So focus on how you're learning something or how you're communicating and what steps you're putting into place there. And you'll see that that'll pay dividends in the long run. And that's just not just for law, but for, all aspects of working in any full-time job.
Great. And Emma?
Beautiful. Agree with all of those sentiments.
Yeah, they're great.
For me, something that I really wish I had been told or really appreciated when I was a law student is that we all have our own journey. There's no one sole correct path. As you can see from all of the panelists tonight, Mika, Jamie, Nathaniel, and I, we've all had very different journeys and we're all just starting our careers. So appreciate that everyone is different, everyone has a different pathway, and to that degree, place less pressure and stress on yourself. Understand that in a sense, what will be will be. You've put in the work, you've tried your best, you've got that practical exposure, you have that element of networking, and look forward to the future of what you can achieve.
Fantastic. Gosh, such wisdom and insights. I am sorry to some people whose questions we haven't got around to, but I just am conscious that it's just on 7 o'clock and people probably want to eat their dinner. So I'd just like to say a huge thank you to you all. Mika, Jamie, Nathaniel, and Emma, you have all been terrific in terms of next generation and lawyers, very inspirational in your stories and your advice. And I'm sure that you have given lots of different ideas and insights to those in the profession. So thank you very much. And just to say on a final note to the audience, thanks very much for being here tonight. And there are a final 2 sessions on as part of the Careers Academy. So one is tomorrow night on Wednesday at 6 p.m. and that's an interesting one. It's called the Unfiltered Truths, a conversation about mental health. And then there is a session on Friday at 1 p.m, which is about work experience. So thank you very much and good night to everyone. Bye.